Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, it's a pleasure to present Alfred Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes, one of his British productions, this one from 1938. This is one of the films that drew worldwide attention to the craftsmanship and artistry of Alfred Hitchcock. It's also, along with The 39 Steps, one of those films that set a standard for the espionage thriller laced, as it were, with romantic comedy. It's a tour de force in every way. We'll be able to talk about that and a number of other aspects of Hitchcock's career once we return after today's screening. It's a pleasure to have returning to City Cinematheque my colleague from the City University, Professor Royal Brown of Queens College. Now, enjoy, maybe not the first time, but enjoy the 20th time, The Lady Vanishes. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you enjoyed The Lady Vanishes, and if we had interactive television, we could have a quiz on whether how many of us could hum that tune at the end of the film. We'll be talking about, in fact, Hitchcock. Okay. And here is our guest. He can do it. Indeed, it's a pleasure to have back on City Cinematheque Royal Brown. Royal teaches at Queens College of the City University and at the CUNY Graduate Center. He's an expert on Hitchcock, on Godard, published a book focused on Godard. Many of our viewers may know him from his writings on film music in Fanfare magazine, and he's most recently the author of Overtones and Undertones, Reading Film Music. Happy to report in its second edition from University of California.
Second printing, not second
here. Second printing, okay. Yeah. Let's start with music. I mean, we've already started in a musical mode, Royal. I want to start with a larger picture of Hitchcock in music. Then we'll move down to, as it were, The Lady Vanishes. Hitchcock is one of the important people in the development of the uses of music in film. I'm now making an assertion. I hope you're going to back me up on that. But let's talk about that for a while. What makes Hitchcock a distinct contributor to how music gets used in film?
He's a distinct contributor because he was very lucky in the composers he got.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Starting with Franz Waxman. The stuff in England, I mean, even with A Man Who Knew Too Much, to get the Storm Clouds cantata out of Arthur Benjamin was a nice coup, and I want to come back to the way he uses music inside the story.
Yes.
Is very important, and very important in The Lady Vanishes. But he was very lucky to get Franz Waxman for Rebecca and The Paradigm Case and Rear Window, certainly, and Suspicion. There's a very sort of expressionistic mood to the whole things that Waxman captures, and of course in Rear Window, there's this song that the composer is composing throughout the film, and as everything gets tied together, the song comes closer to completion. Right. And it's a good song, and Franz Waxman wrote it. But when he got to 1955 and The Trouble with Harry and got to Bernard Herrmann, there was just a perfect mingling of spirits there. Herrmann is sort of passionate, fiery, romantic, and Hitchcock, this very cool English classicist, and was very much into structure, more than into telling actors how they're supposed to feel and that sort of thing. Yes. You know, Kim is just a movie. There was just this chemistry, and Bernard Herrmann really found a sound for Hitchcock's suspense, starting by building up this sort of chord that sort of vertically captures what's being elaborated in Hitchcock's very carefully put together narrative structures. And this went through, of course, you have the Trouble with Harry, The Man Who Knew Too Much, The Wrong Man, and then, of course, the classics, Vertigo, North by Northwest, and Psycho.
Right.
Herrmann would have loved, I'm sure, to have done a background score for The Birds, but Hitchcock wanted these sort of electronic things, which Herrmann had something of a hand in, but not much. And then there's Marnie. And then Bernard Herrmann may have written the most famous film score in history that wasn't used, which was for Hitchcock's Torn Curtain. Hitchcock was working for Universal, and Universal didn't really want Herrmann. He insisted on keeping Herrmann for Torn Curtain, but said, Benny, could you do something a little lighter, which was not exactly in Bernard Herrmann's nature. So he wrote this crushing score for 12 flutes and 8 horns and no violins, and Hitchcock heard the overture, walked out, and they had a bitter parting of the ways. But a lot of it was Bernard Herrmann. I mean, I don't think Hitchcock had that much of an idea about music himself.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
But Herman certainly did. Hitchcock, for instance, did not want to use music in the shower scene in Psycho. And Benny comes up to him and says, look, I've got this great idea, let's at least try it. And of course, the screeching violins in during the murder scenes in Psycho are probably the most famous film music, and it's really a trope. I'm going to call it a trope because it really has become a trope. Brian De Palma has used it, and other directors as well. I mean, you can't think of murder anymore without feeling and hearing these screeching violins in your head. What's interesting is that the Psycho score was partially carried over from a piece that Herman had written back in the 1930s.
How did music play a part in Hitchcock, do you think, in Hitchcock's planning of a film? Because, I mean, this is one of the most famous planners in film history. I find it interesting, by the way, Royal, that you've done significant work on Hitchcock and Godard, because these are two directors who, while their accomplishments may be comparable, have two completely different styles of modes of production. Hitchcock is the person who planned everything before it was done, and Godard...
Except the music.
Oh, okay, okay. And Godard is the person who people are famous for. Well, we never know what he's going to do the next day. The mode of production's very, very loose and improvisational. Well, what more about that?
Well, again, I don't think that Hitchcock, that's one element that Hitchcock did not plan out. I think, like a lot of very strong directors, John Ford being another example, he would have been happy if he could have gotten away without using music in his films. I'm certain of it. I think that he wanted his artistic vision to be as much him as possible. And when you turn over something to a composer, you're losing some of that control. Bernard Herrmann says Hitchcock finishes a film 60%. I finish the other 40%, or vice versa. I forget what the figure was he gave. But I don't think Hitchcock planned out the music. And traditionally, that isn't done in Hollywood. Traditionally, the composer is not brought in until the film is already in a rough cut. And I don't have any indication that Hitchcock even used temp tracks, which they do all the time these days. They'll lay in any kind of music they can get in a CD. And I'd hate to be a composer coming in and watching the rough cut and having to work off of a temp or a scratch track, which Hitchcock, as far as I know, never used. But there is stuff, of course, going on inside of the movies, such as the Storm Clouds cantata, the song in The Lady Vanishes, and the song in Rear Window, that kind of thing.
Well, let me turn this around, because I think this is a very interesting way to go with the conversation. Let's now relate music that comes from the outside the story world to the way he uses music inside the story world of the characters, and then that in relationship to something larger than music, which is the overall sound design of a film. Because music is, of course, only one component of the variety of possibilities of use of sound. How is music important? We can move on to Lady Vanishes. Music important inside the story world. How do you think Hitchcock
Well, of course, the classic example of that is both versions of The Man Who Knew Too Much, in which a whole murder is planned around a cymbal crash in this cantata for large chorus, large orchestra, and so forth, that was composed especially for the film by the Australian-born Arthur Benjamin. The way I've written about it is that I really see that Hitchcock uses music in the film in a certain way, that the bad guys are trying to get control of the music as a way of creating a sort of interior narrative that they can control. When they lose control of the music, they have their fall down. So when the heroine screams in The Man Who Knew Too Much, that interrupts the musical flow just enough for them to lose control of the narrative. It reverts back to Hitchcock or however you want. It's very meta-cinematic. And you have this certainly in the A Young and Innocent movie, in which the drummer, as the camera is tracking in on him, loses control. Or that wonderful scene in Rope where Farley Granger is sitting at the piano and playing this piece by Poulenc, and the Jimmy Stewart character puts the metronome faster and faster and faster, and here as the metronome beats faster and faster, this perfect crime just sinks into oblivion. And of course the song being put together in Rear Window. I think Hitchcock very often used music as a kind of metonymy for the narrative structure itself, and the ability of the characters in the film to control the music is, to a certain degree, the way that they're rivaling Hitchcock.
Well, this is very interesting because, again, one of the things that you've worked on in your scholarship is modern narrative. I mean, you're trained in French studies, et cetera. And one of the things that it may not be only in certain forms of modern literature, but it's certainly more characteristic of modern narrative, and I say narrative to include, obviously, film in this, is those works that include some kinds of mirror images of their own organizing principles within the text themselves. And I think that's one of the things, I mean, and again, technically in narrative theory it's called mise en abîme.
Yes.
But again, you've pointed out so many examples in Hitchcock in which he incorporates this, in which somehow the music becomes some kind of image of the internal organizing principle for the narrative, or of the struggle for the control of the plot or the narrative. And we see that.
Notice that the Peter Lorre character in M gets his whistling interrupted, and he's not able to follow through on one of the murders that he's planning. I mean, it's sort of, and Hitchcock comes right out of that German expressionistic tradition.
Well, and of course, I mean, just to think about some of the most obvious examples from the 30s, in the 39 Steps, the whole key to Mr. Memory and what is going on there is the music played in the variety hall. That's the theme music of Mr. Memory. We'll have you back to perform all the music, not to talk about it. And you can do it because you're a musician as well. The other thing is, of course, in The Lady Vanishes, the whole notion that the song that the innocent governess is playing is somehow an encoding, a direct encoding of important narrative information. And interesting as well that the Michael Redgrave character is explicitly portrayed, thematicized as an ethnomusicologist.
Yeah, exactly, with a fabulous memory for themes, which he promptly forgets as soon as he realizes he's going to get married.
Right, as soon as he gets involved in one plot as opposed to the other.
Or as soon as he gets involved with a woman, it all goes down. And he forgets the song. Fortunately, Dame May Whitty is there to carry on. But what's interesting about what goes on in The Lady Vanishes is that the song that the man sings outside of Dame May Whitty's window, which is obviously communicating it to her, although we don't know it at the time. The song is tied in, is basically the MacGuffin device in the Hitchcock film. I mean, Hitchcock loved to, go ahead.
Talk just a little bit about what a MacGuffin is. I mean, in one sense it's a commonplace, but people should be introduced to the idea. What did Hitchcock define the MacGuffin as?
MacGuffin is basically the device that keeps the narrative moving. It's what everybody wants to get, and such as the piece of microfilm in North by Northwest, or the uranium in the wine bottles in Notorious, which he said could just as easily have been industrial diamonds or something like that. In other words, it's an arbitrary plot gimmick that keeps the plot moving. And I think the importance of this that people don't talk about as much is that really Hitchcock's cinema is so much deeper than its narrative devices. And so, and Hitchcock, even though he never talked in that with great profundity about what he did, there's an implication in which you hear him talk about the MacGuffin. Really, I don't really care about the story. It's how the film is made and what's beneath all of the story here. So, I mean, the gimmick in Lady Vanishes is totally inconsequential as to everything else that's going on in the film. It's just, oh gee, a treaty between nations. Well, what does this treaty mean? I mean, we haven't the foggiest, we don't know why the bad guys don't want it to get out or anything else like that, nor do we particularly care because everything else that's going on in the film is so much more interesting. So, and yet there's something very gripping about the fact that in this particular film, the MacGuffin takes the form of a work of music.
Well, it's also interesting that one of the things about a MacGuffin is that it keeps, it sets up something. Its inconsequentiality sets up something that so many Hitchcock characters are propelled into action, and forms of action they really probably never expected themselves to be involved in, by something they don't know. They really are operating in the dark. And by the time you get to the end and get some kind of minimal explanation of the MacGuffin, it's irrelevant in relationship to the experience they have had in the quest for it. And whether that was important or unimportant would not influence, in fact, the nature of the way in which they've had to alter their behavior, get involved in problem solving. You know, how do you get yourself off the nose of Abraham Lincoln? Things like that in North by Northwest, or how do you fight Central European, by implication,
Terrorists,
fascist, et cetera here. Well, let's talk about...
Speaking a totally phony language.
oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, it's a sort of great, but they use the language, another aspect of sound in it, that just has enough words that are sort of a fake romance language. It's sort of like, well, gee, would they say, I don't know Romanian, but could officer be sort of like oficial, something like that. What else about the... The Lady Vanishes is one of those several films that not only, added fuel to Hitchcock's extraordinarily high reputation within the British film industry at that point, but really helped propel him into the international sphere.
He made one more film in England, Jamaica Inn, and then he was in Hollywood for the rest of his career.
That's absolutely right. So what are some of the other aspects of this as a Hitchcock film, of the Hitchcockian style, of narrative strategies that you think distinguish this?
Well, one thing that I find fascinating about Hitchcock's British films and in the American films, through Notorious, when Cary Grant punches out Ingrid Bergman's lights, then it sort of turns around. But it's amazing how many of Hitchcock's British films revolve around a kind of an initiatory process for a young woman who, in The Lodger, is basically engaged to a cop. A young woman who is dating a cop in Blackmail. In Young and Innocent, she has a policeman boyfriend and so forth. And somehow these women are attracted to the darker side. Obviously, The Lodger may be Jack the Ripper. She's attracted to the Cyril Richard character in Blackmail, and he proceeds to try to rape her, and she kills him. And in Young and Innocent, she's attracted to one of Hitchcock's classic wrong men. But again, it's these women who are attracted to the dark side. Now, in The Lady Vanishes, the Margaret Lockwood character is engaged to be married. And it's quite obvious from the beginning of the film she is sort of doing this out of her duty to God and country, and out of no desire to sacrifice this obvious independence that she has from the very beginning of the film. She's a very independent woman. It comes across that there are some fairly risque shots of her in the bedroom and so forth from the beginning. And what happens is that she gets involved with a Michael Redgrave character, of course initially negatively, but of course they get involved, they come together via a murder plot, or at least in this case a plot that's going to end up in the murder of Miss Froy. And she ultimately ends up rejecting her English fiancé and ending up with Michael Redgrave. And it happens constantly in Hitchcock's pictures, even when you get to Shadow of a Doubt, where the Teresa Wright character is basically in love with her Uncle Charlie, who is a killer of old women, and ends up with a cop. And now there the situation is starting to turn around a little bit, but it's still, he focuses on independent women who are attracted to the dark side constantly, and this is in The Lady Vanishes.
Well, that's interesting, because one of the things it points out to is the way in which he plays with what you might say quantitatively are some of the dominant patterns of the classical cinema, which, if you talk, again, just total number of pictures, usually is involved with some kind of male professional task, and subservient to that male professional task is some kind of developing heterosexual romance. And one of the things you're talking about here is, first of all, the displacement of that, so that at least one of the primary charges for the quest or the task is in the hands of the woman, and instead of, in the sort of cliched way, one thing, sort of the woman sort of being semi-attached to the male professional task in some way, all of a sudden those two processes become intertwined and frequently led by the woman. And I think that's one of the things that reminds us of Hitchcock's seemingly constant modernity. That is, you can see a picture like this, almost 60 years old, and it's not just that there's risque dialogue or that the pacing is extraordinary, all that, but there's a whole set of attitudes that are seemingly so easily proposed in the film. I mean, there's a lightness to it all. There's no bright lights. It says contemporary in some way, but it maintains.
It's very British in that way, and it's a very, very British film. And of course, besides, you mentioned the word heterosexual. Well, certainly this pair of English gentlemen who are dying to find out about the cricket match and dying to get to the cricket match. I mean, there's a very strong implication of homosexuality there, including this sort of devastating shot of the two of them in bed with the one guy's pajama top off.
Absolutely.
And everything. I mean, it's not an overt theme in Hitchcock, but and it's always a little bit dangerous to read homosexuality anytime you see two men together like that. But it's certainly there seems to be an implication, in particular in that bed shot, and the fact that they seem to have zero use for this woman who's practically stripping in front of them.
Well, I think that it's one of these very funny plays on a whole cultural tradition of the good old boy network, and these are fellows who've been interested in cricket since they were at public school together, and it's both, an incapacity to grow up. They really are these kind of schoolboys who are far more interested in all of these things and all of those nasty things that happen in the larger world in other countries and with women. And then there are these foreigners who are so difficult in all those kinds of ways. And I think you're right that there's this riffing on the fact that they may be gay, but again, not underlined, and part of the play there is with their very Britishness.
Oh yes, it's a ferocious satire on their Britishness. I mean, the fact that the cricket match becomes of world importance, and of course, this other British gentleman who ultimately gets killed, I mean, would rather do anything than rock the boat. I mean, he's running off with this woman who's already told her husband goodbye, and then all of a sudden he starts waffling on whether he's going to marry her or not, and then when the climactic scene comes, he absolutely will not get involved. Well, they can't do this, we're British, and so forth. He even goes out waving a white flag. They shoot him, and he's lying on the ground about to die, and he, but hey, I was waving a white flag. I mean, there's incapacity in the British to understand that you don't play always by gentlemen's rules, and it's a sort of a vicious satire in many ways, and yet ultimately they band together. Even the phony nun doesn't slip the Mickey into the drinks because well, she was a nice British woman. And,
you never said she was British.
Yes.
Now, what about the visual style of this
now,
film?
One thing that's fascinating, of course, is it was shot on a set about 90 feet long. I mean, the film, from the point of view of the modern viewer, the film reeks of set and background. But what he does is nonetheless amazing. He opens the film with this little model railroad set, for all intents and purposes, and has this toy truck moving with a little plastic man in it. But he does one of his classic shots, a camera coming up from above the city, so to speak, above the railroad station and the hotel, and dollying in until it goes in through the window of the hotel. Now he has to have a cut there because we're going from a little model railroad set to a set in the studios. But I mean, it's a classic opening Hitchcock shot. He does it in Psycho with a camera coming down the cross Phoenix, Arizona, and into the hotel room where Janet Leigh and John Gavin are. So here, and then there's a lot of dialogue, and it takes the film a long time to get set up. But there's some wonderful touches, particularly, for instance, in the baggage car, where there's all this magician's apparatus, and then the magician shows up, and he's fighting while a life-size dummy of his is watching over the whole thing. The rabbit's watching, and then another classic Hitchcock gimmick that he does, of course, in Spellbound, is he uses huge objects to get them foregrounded in the frame, so that when the so-called drugged brandy is sitting there on the table in the dining car, Hitchcock gets the camera behind these oversized glasses and therefore has us worrying about the drugged brandy because of the visual presence of these glasses. So there's a lot of nice little stuff going on in the film, which is there's a wonderful moment where Michael Redgrave is in Margaret Redford's bathroom, and she walks into the bathroom, and suddenly she sort of appears out of the darkness in the mirror. There's just little touches like that. It's not one of the films that you can sit and have your breath taken away with the virtuosity of its editing and stuff like that. And yet, the more you look at it, the more you realize there are a lot of wonderful little touches.
It doesn't have, I mean, a number of his films, as we all know, have even if they were not designed as such, though one suspects they were, they have set pieces in them. I mean, there's famously in North by Northwest, there's the crop dusting scene.
Which, of course, has no music. He got away with. He didn't.
Well, what he got away with at that time. But wanted to come back to one other topic. Hitchcock is one of those directors who uses trains a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think of? Why trains, and what are some of the uses of the train in this film?
The obvious biographical answer is that Hitchcock loved to travel, and he spent a lot of time on trains and so forth. And basically, in the world at that time, and a lot of American films are shot on trains and stuff like that, it becomes a little microcosm within which all sorts of action can take place. And there's really no place to go. There's almost a sense of claustrophobia. And I mean, if you look at Hitchcock's films, there's always some sort of phobia that seems to underline what's going on. I mean, the fact that you're in this train, and of course in The Lady Vanishes, it certainly adds to the plot, because how are you going to kidnap somebody on a train? Right. Where are you going to hide the person? How are you going to pull this off? I mean, it definitely adds a certain narrative interest, but there's also the sense of being trapped. I mean, we're all here, and it's all these interacting characters, and there is a kind of a grand hotel feeling,
absolutely,
to the film as well.
And one of the things I find interesting, just at a technical level, about this is you were talking about how small the soundstage was. They would be shooting this on, and yet there's a really full apparatus here to create the illusion of being on a train. We're talking about sets that have to be cut out on one full side. We're talking about shooting. Really, at certain points, he shoots in a 360-degree space to create the illusion of fully being in there. Again, the soundtrack not in its expressionist mode, but in its illusionist mode, really gives us this sense of the sound of being on a train and of its movement. We have the jiggling of the train. All of these things building this up. What do you think this film? We just have a minute to go. What would you say is the accomplishment of this film, if you had to sort of summarize it in some way?
Certainly its simplicity. Its simplicity and its charm. I think one reason it's so popular is because even though there are some undercurrents that we could spend the next 3 days discussing in the film, it isn't one of these doom and gloom Hitchcock pictures that send you home thinking about every Freudian aberration you could possibly imagine. There's a certain charm to it. It's Hitchcock, to a certain degree, almost saying goodbye to England. I think he knows he's not going to be there that much longer, therefore he's poking gentle fun at England at the same time. It's a sort of a love letter to England. It's a very English film. And he shows up in the film, by the way, at the very end when they get off the train in the London station. He walks across the screen from
Well, that's a good
right
place for us to say goodbye to today's segment. Thanks for that. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, CUNY TV, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036. Let me give you that information again. City Cinematheque, CUNY TV, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036. Always a pleasure to have you here for lively discussion, as we sometimes call it. Thanks for contributing, and look forward to seeing you again, Royal.
Me too. Thank you.
Great.
Take care.
And I hope that you join us again for another episode of City Cinematheque. Thanks for joining us today.